Hey you guys, it's week 6. You made it through. Congratulations on almost being finished and almost being to a break. So let's take a look here at what we got going on. I'm going to share my application as always. Hey, there we go. Okay, let's start with our overview of Module 6. So I really enjoyed doing all the videos for Module 6 because I like literature and I like reading and I like plays and all that good stuff. And some of you were pleasantly surprised that you didn't like the reading, but you liked the watching. This one's a little bit drier. What we're going to focus on Module 6 isn't quite so exciting. We're going to focus on reminding you about some things with MLA format. We're also going to focus on some things having to do with the actual structural writing of your essay that you have to do for paper 3. So I know there's a lot of questions on this, so let's kind of get started. Let's look through the learning resources first. Of course, you've gotten all of these things that you've already that you're familiar with. The EBSCO hosts databases, which we've kind of gone over a little bit to help you find those sources. We'll be looking at some of these resources for MLA formatting in a little bit. And when you're clicking through this lesson, I'm not going to click through all of it, of course, but I just want to kind of point out a couple of things. One, and I know you've struggled with this because most of you aren't probably English majors. So as English majors, we love doing this kind of thing, but most other people don't. But I want to kind of point out how some of this is going to be useful to you, even if you're not an English major, right? So one, by the end of this, you're going to be able to integrate scholarship into a literary analysis of a play. That sounds very specific to English, but the analysis skills are one of the things that almost all of our alumni come back and say, hey, we really want future students to be a little better at learning how to do analysis. So that's one of the reasons we incorporate this skill set into this. Next one, describing the impact of a piece of fictional literature upon personal development. Remember that our goal at all classes at Indiana Tech is to kind of show you how you live a life of significance and worth. And that's relevant no matter where you're going, where you're going to work, what you're going to be doing. So even though fictional literature, you might think, well, that doesn't really impact me, it really does, right? Because you're learning how to be a broader person with more depth and be able to put yourselves in other people's shoes, which is really useful in a work situation, in a module situation as well, because you might be meeting someone, you might be working with someone that's got a totally different life situation than you, and you're going to have this experience behind you going, hey, I know how to do this because I've practiced. And again, making a connection between literature and one's sense of significance and worth, that's a high-level skill set to be able to take something that's outside of yourself and connect it to yourself, right? So that's why this is important, the whole class is important. We're going to look a little bit more. Remember that here's some more stuff about fences. That's what you're working with as far as your writing. That's a lot to do, right? And some of you liked the play, some of you didn't like the play. Some of you found that you liked it more than you thought, all kinds of different reasonings. When I go through your reflections, I find them to be really fascinating. So that's kind of where we're at with these things. We always try to connect our lives of significance worth, to keep reminding you that all of these things are to help you, really, that's why you go to college, is to make your life have more significance and more worth in whatever way you make that happen, right? So we want to keep reminding you. And we want to, of course, thank you for taking this course, because many of you didn't have to take this course. It was an elective. So thank you. And we're glad to know that you guys are out there making the world a better place, right? Okay, so that was kind of vague and kind of gushy, but I really do like you guys. So let's go back to Module 6. I want to kind of go over the activities that you have to do this week. As always, there's the discussion, which is due, your first piece, your first part, your post is due by Thursday. And then, of course, I always recommend that you, even though the peer reviews aren't due until Sunday, a lot of you missed that part, right? If you wait till the end, one, you're not getting the feedback from your peers, so you can't incorporate it in your own stuff. And two, you're not being able to give them the feedback which is also helping you because you're analyzing their stuff and going, oh, what's good about theirs? How could I incorporate that in mine? So if you're doing this discussion, post it by Thursday, and then get back to doing the peer reviews by Friday or Saturday. That gives you a little bit of time to still, let that stuff marinate in your head. So you are doing for your response. Go back and review the textbook's assertions about why we read literature, right? That's also kind of high level because you're thinking, why do I read literature? I don't have time to read literature. I don't have time to do anything. But thinking about personal and intellectual development of yourself is very important, right? Think about all the texts we've read and which two provided you with the most impact. Which two over the entire semester helped you, or at least, and it could be that you liked it the most, but it also could be that you hated something the most, but that somehow impacted you, right? Name the two texts, connect them to one of the reasons with why we read literature, right? So what were those two texts that you read? Could be a poem, could be a short story, it could be a drama, it could be anything you want. And why you reread literature connected to that idea from the textbook. And then you're going to be responding, oh, that's right, I forgot. It's module 6. So you don't have to do responses for this one. Woohoo! That's fantastic, right? Because you're all going to be celebrating Thanksgiving at this point, right? Okay, so comparative research over fences. After reading and watching it and kind of looking through the scholar's analysis, I warn you, I hope you listen to it to enjoy it first. And then you're writing, you're quoting, you're summarizing, you're paraphrasing about two scholarly critiques of the play. Now, that is not an easy thing to do, and we're going to watch some videos that kind of help you with maybe some ways in which you might want to do that. But first, let's open up this paper. Okay, so you should be able to see this is what the paper says. We're just going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb because I want to make sure that this makes sense to you. Let's look at one page first. Okay, so you're doing a comparative research paper over fences, right? So August Wilson's Fences that you've read, probably watched, but you're then adding something to that by researching scholars' analysis of the play. And you're going to then quote, summarize, and paraphrase two of these critiques. Now, what do I want and what do I not want? These are the tips, right? I do not want a thing that just summarizes the play. And that's really difficult to do, right? Because we're used to writing informational things where we just say, this is what we see. Analysis is a step beyond that where we're analyzing it, and that's difficult. So we're really trying to steep you in analysis. What it's like to analyze something, how do we do it, how can you do it, how can you transfer it to other things that you're going to be doing. So you'll be reading those two professional interpretations, or you've probably already read them. And then your thesis is some sort of an assertion about them, not about the play, but about the analysis of the play. So keep that in mind. That's the part that people get confused about. So you're writing a comparison or contrast paper in which you describe the two analyses, right? So about fences. Okay? They could be similar. They could be different. You can say they're alike in this way. They're different in this way. You might do both. Some people write all comparison. Some people write all contrast. Some people write compare and contrast. Up to you. The paper should be about 2.5 pages long. Okay. Double spaced, not single spaced. Remember, indent your paragraphs, double space, all college papers unless given other instructions. Your introduction paragraph, right? That's the first thing that really kind of helps you get focused on the right thing. This should be broadly about the play, but then narrow it down to something really specific. So a possible thesis statement might be something like, well, Smith, that's one of your authors, sees X, sees something in August Wilson's Fences. Garcia, or some other author, gives more emphasis to Y, whatever else you decide. Make sure the X and the Y are from the articles, and there's something that has to do with significance about the play. It might be about any of the things that we've learned about. It could be themes, it could be metaphors, it could be tone, it could be stance, it could be where it's located. It could be any of the things that we've kind of talked about through this entire 6 weeks. Now, what we don't want to write, we don't want to just say they have some similarities or some differences, which is, of course, going to be true. They're two different people. Don't state the obvious. Assert what the differences are. This makes your thesis statement something substantive. We want it to say something to be read. So then the rest of that paper is going to support and develop whatever your thesis statement says. Use the name of the two scholars often in your paper. They say Smith and Garcia. They'll be whatever ones you've chosen. And you want to start, remember that your topic sentences in the body paragraphs are main ideas, right? So Smith is going to say this, and you're going to be comparing and contrasting often in those topic sentences. After, you'll be choosing one of the two ways. Now, remember, we've talked about two different ways of organizing a comparison contrast. One is that umbrella approach, where you name both authors as you contrast a similarity or difference about them in each paragraph. So paragraph 1, a similarity or a difference, right? This is the umbrella because this is sort of the both authors, right? We're doing both authors in each paragraph. The block approach is a little bit different, and that's where you're going to talk about one author. Okay, here's the author number 1, here's their thing, and then the next paragraph might be author number 2, and here's how they're different or the same, right? So you can choose whether you want block or umbrella. It depends kind of on the two that you've chosen, and they'll probably naturally lend themselves to working one way or the other. There's no right or wrong answer, okay? Again, make sure that you're using transition words when you shift from one author to another author or from one paragraph to another paragraph. Again, transitions likewise, however, there's a lot, hundreds, thousands of transitions. They help smooth things out. In your conclusion, make a statement about why this scholarship matters in terms of your understanding of the play. In conclusion, you got all the comparisons, you got all the contrasts, now what, right? Oftentimes, a conclusion will have some sort of what we call a CTA. That stands for call to action. In this case, your call to action might be just, why did you read these? What did it matter to your life? How did it matter to your significance and worth? Okay. As usual, don't forget this will be in MLA. You'll have a works cited page. And there's some criteria here which will help you, again, before you turn it in, take a look at the criteria, go through the rubric, make sure you've gotten everything that makes sense, right? Okay, so that document is located right here. Okay, so when you open up Module 6, Activities and Assessments, and you go down, you can see this comparative research document that I just opened right there. The criteria, again, is right here, so you can see it without opening up. And then, so the overview here kind of goes through your discussion board. So what do you have to do with this one? So you've written a discussion board, you've kind of thought that through, talked that through, even though you're not talking to your peers as much this time. You can if you want to. Reflect upon the reading you've done, and again, this final essay will choose one of those texts that had the most impact on your personal development. This is kind of like the final exam. You don't have to cram for it, but you write this essay that kind of helps you discuss one of the things that you read and thought about a lot this semester. So you can re-quote from things that you wrote about during the week that we discussed, whichever one you want to do. You can go back and use some of those things. Again, concentrating on how it contributes to your understanding of your life of significance and worth, which is our mission statement, right? The paper can contain reflective moments. It asks for your opinion, so you can use the word I. Make sure you quote from the text at least 3 times. They can be the quotes that you've used in an essay from the past. That's okay. As usual, you're going to use standard essay structure, organization, body, conclusion. Make sure you introduce it, MLA format, and here's your rubric for that particular essay. Okay, so you have 2 writings to do. Finish the one up from week 5 and write this kind of final exam. And then do the tech reflection, of course. As always, there's a lot to do, so you're starting today, hopefully. Monday, and you're going to get these things all done. You'll be doing something every day of the week, no doubt. But then you get a break, right? Get to take a little bit of break and congratulate yourself on finishing week 6. All right, now we've got some things to take a look at. So 2 of the things that they give you, let's start with this one. We're going to quickly do some MLA format stuff. So let's take a look at 2 quick videos. Let me see if I have. First one pulled up. MLA, I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing. And welcome to those of you coming in. I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing my sound. Don't want any of that, no sound. Okay, so a quick reminder about some MLA style in-text citations. Here we go.
A vidcast lecture brought to you by Eliza Gellis.
I'm going to make that a little bit louder.
Cooperation with Purdue Online Writing Lab. What is an in-text citation? In MLA, when you reference others' work in your writing, you use a parenthetical or an in-text citation. This involves placing that source information in parentheses at the end of the sentence. So, when do you need an in-text citation? You use in-text citations in 2 situations. One, when you directly quote someone, like here, for example, where we use Wordsworth's own words. Or 2, when you reference or paraphrase their work, like we do here, when we summarize Wordsworth's ideas in our own words. So, how do you cite in text? First, there's author page style. Just use the author's last name followed by the page number. If there is no page number, just the name is fine. For example, here we show Wordsworth's name and the page where we got the quote. For a corporate author, just use the name of the organization followed by the page number, if there is one. As we can see here, we summarize information from an EPA report, listing both the EPA and the page with paraphrasing. For 2 authors, list both last names in the order they appear in the source, like we do here with Best and Marcus. For 3 or more authors, list the first author's last name and replace the other author's last names with et al. Just like the example, only the first author's name is shown. If you're using more than one work by an author, use a shortened version of the title in your citation to specify which work you're citing. Looking to the example below, here we use visual studies as a shortened title to let our readers know specifically which of Elkins's pieces we're quoting. And if there is no author, just use a shortened version of the title. Again, here we use impact of global warming to help our readers identify which piece we're quoting, since this article has no author. With online sources, you're unlikely to have a page number, so just the author's name or the title is fine. For example, since the Purdue OWL webpage doesn't have numbered pages, we just list the authors who worked on the specific piece we're quoting. Still confused or unsure? When in doubt, just remember that your in-text citation should match up with the first thing listed for that source in your work cited. Lastly, there's signaling in text. That's when you incorporate all or part of your parenthetical citation into the sentence itself. Thinking through this, we can see from the example below that we've included the author's name, part of our citation, into the sentence itself. This is often the most elegant way to incorporate a quote and use an in-text citation. Thanks for watching, and don't forget.
Okay, hopefully that gave you some tips and maybe helped you think through a couple of different things. And I hear that you guys are having an echo. Let me try something different, see if we can get something working a little better. Let's try this one. This is a separate one that again gives you some tips on MLA. Turn that off and see if that helps. Okay. And this is the works cited page itself.
We are going to go over basic formatting for your works cited page, and this works cited page uses the updated MLA guidelines from 2016 in the 8th edition. First formatting thing I want to call your attention to is noticing that works cited.
I want to point out that, as she said, this is the 2016 one. This is the one that is provided to you within the learning resources. 2016 was a long time ago. There are other updates since then, but I'm gonna go with this one. Notice that there are some differences, and you'll probably have noticed this too. Every couple years or so, MLA and every other format puts out a new update on stuff because there's things like, TikTok. Well, in 2016, TikTok wasn't a thing, so they had to get together and go, okay, if somebody wanted to cite a TikTok, how would they do it? We need to put together a form. So you'll note that I don't get real excited about some minor differences in MLA, and that's because you may be using different versions of it. So just so that you know that.
It's centered at the top of this page. Please note that you need a capital W and a capital C. Please note that nothing is capitalized, nothing is bold, and the font will be the same size as the rest of the paper. What I have here for formatting is basically the Microsoft Word default formatting, and we're going to change this to be in line with the MLA preferred formatting guidelines. First thing I'm going to do is select all the text, and we're going to start by changing the font. MLA prefers Times New Roman, or a similar font, and a 12-point setting. While we've got everything selected here, we're also going to fix the spacing and the indentation. And to do this, we're going to go by where it says paragraph, this little thing here, and it's going to bring up this dialog box. And when you see this dialog box, you want to do three things. The first thing you need to do is check this box. If you don't check this box, you'll end up with an extra space in between your citations. The next thing you want to do is change the line spacing to double if it's not already there. Your entire paper in MLA format should be always double spaced, so make sure you're doing that to your works cited page as well. And then the last thing we're going to do for the works cited page only is change the indentation to a hanging indent. Here under special, we're going to change it to hanging. And then I'm going to click OK. And now my page is properly formatted with spacing and indentation. The next formatting issue I want to call your attention to is that every article title or web page title has quotation marks around it. So this is the title of the article here with quotation marks. This is the actual web page article type thing I was looking at here. Again, quotation marks. Also use quotation marks if you have a book chapter. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is what's italicized. We italicize the name of the periodical. So the name of the newspaper, the magazine, or the journal is always going to be in italics, like Saturday Evening Post or Relational Child and Youth Care Practice. Also italicized are names of websites, like National Museum of Roller Skating website. Book titles are also in italics. The next thing I want to call your attention to is that this page is in alphabetical order. So double check to make sure your works cited page has the citations listed in alphabetical order, and if they don't, cut and paste them so they are. Usually we're using the author's last name here, but in this case we have a source with no author, and so we use the first word of the title and alphabetized by E. The last formatting issue that you might come across has to do with these hyperlinks, or things that can become hyperlinks. I'm going to make this into a hyperlink real quick. And you might find, depending on when you hit enter, a hyperlink on your Microsoft Word page. And we don't want these hyperlinks. MLA does not want those. So to get rid of it is real easy. All I need to do is right click and remove hyperlink, and it gets rid of that blue font and that underlining in that hyperlink.
And a little note on that. Even though that's a specific MLA thing to remove hyperlinks, myself, I like them because I like to click on your stuff and see them, so you do not have to remove hyperlinks in your works cited page for me.
No, I've been using Germany for years, so
Okay. A couple more tips on things there. Did that help with the voice double sound? Those of you that are here, Mara, did that help with the voice double by changing that thing at the end, or no? Are you still hearing double voices?
It was not double, but it was really bad.
It's just not great, huh?
Yeah, it's loud and you have an echo, but not double. It's bad. I have to put it down the audio to understand.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll continue our different thoughts on technology this particular week. I have a couple more videos I want to show you because this is a difficult thing to do, the comparison contrast. So I will turn the sound down a little bit, see if that is helpful. And we'll see what we can do here. All right, so what we have next, you guys have to write a comparison contrast. So I want to give you some tips and tricks on how to do that. So here's a video that kind of helps with that process.
Hi there, let's talk about how to write a great comparative thesis statement. Now, remember that this video is building off of my previous video that I did on single text analyses. So if you haven't watched that previous video, the link is here on the screen. In particular, remember that your comparative thesis does still need to avoid the same 6 issues that I talked about in my previous video. Those are the topic sentence, the question format, preview of arguments, vagueness, being untenable or unprovable, and being true but obvious. So if you're uncertain about any of those, go back and watch that previous video again for some more about it. When you're ready to actually start writing your comparative thesis, you should start by asking yourself 3 questions. The first question is, what 2 things are you comparing? Are you going to compare 2 people, 2 characters? Are there 2 actions that you want to compare, or a similar action that occurs in both texts? Is the same theme dealt with in both texts, and do you want to look at that? Or are there 2 symbols or a similar symbol in both texts that you want to compare? Or is there something else? The key here is that you want to pick something specific that you're comparing. Don't just try to compare some broad concept like all the characters in the book or all the themes or something like that. You need something really specific. Otherwise, your thesis is going to end up in a very vague format. Once you have your 2 things you're going to compare, you can move on to question 2, which is, what is the point of comparison between these 2 people or things? In other words, are you going to focus on a particular similarity or a particular difference? It's okay to look a bit at both, but you want your main focus, your main interest, to be on just one or the other. And you want it to be a specific similarity or difference. Don't just broadly say, oh, these 2 things are dealt with in a similar way. That is going to be too vague for a thesis. Then your third question is, why are you comparing these 2 things to each other? In other words, why is this comparison important or noteworthy? Sometimes the answer to this is that it helps us to understand something deeper about one or both of the characters you may be comparing. It might help us to understand a greater message about people or life in general. Maybe it helps us to understand the themes in the text better. Maybe it helps us to reflect on our own lives as readers. Also, sometimes your similarity or difference that you're looking at is surprising. And maybe you want to look a little further at the text to try to explain why that similarity is there or why that difference is there. Then once you've got these 3 questions answered, then you start actually wording your thesis statement. The way I'm going to suggest you do this is by writing 3 separate sentences. The first 2 sentences are not going to be your actual thesis. They're going to be part of your introduction paragraph for your essay, and they're going to set up the context for your actual thesis. Now, this is also not the only way to write a comparative thesis statement, but I do recommend it for students who are new to this idea of writing comparative theses. It works well, and I think it helps to make the concept of the comparative thesis a little easier to work with. So anyway, if you are more interested in the point of difference between your two things that you're comparing, then this formula number 1 is the way you're going to go. Your first sentence is going to start by pointing out the way that your two items are similar. This can be absolutely obvious, and that is fine. It's a good starting point. It's not going to be the main thing you're focusing on. Then, in your second sentence, explain the point of difference. Talk about the perhaps less obvious way that your two things are different from each other. And then finally, in your third sentence, explain why we care about this less obvious difference. Explain, does it help us to understand something better? Does it help us to reflect on ourselves in some way? Or perhaps your point of difference is surprising. So maybe go on and look at the text more deeply to try to describe or explain why that difference is there. These are the sorts of things you want to put in your third sentence. Now, formula 2 here is what you will use if you're more interested in the point of similarity. It's pretty much the same as formula 1. The only difference is my little tuning fork image there has flipped upside down. Now, your first sentence is going to be about the way that your two items are different from each other, and that will be probably the most obvious part of what you're writing here. Then the less obvious point of similarity will be your second sentence, and then third, you'll explain why we care about the similarity or how we can explain it. Now do watch out. Whichever way you decide to write, whether you're more focused on the similarity or the difference, do make sure that your similarity and your difference are linked to each other in some way. Otherwise, what you write is going to end up sounding a little bit tangential, and your thesis may not make much sense. Here's an example of a bad thesis. Both Sally and John enjoy spending all of their time reading books. While Sally likes to eat pizza, however, John prefers sushi. This difference in taste shows that John is more refined than Sally. Now, the second two sentences here link to each other and follow each other logically, but that first sentence is totally out there. It's talking about reading books, and the next two sentences have nothing to do with books. So this is an example of where the similarity and the difference are not linked to each other, and it's causing a writing issue here. You can fix it by writing something like this. Both Sally and John enjoy spending all of their time reading books. While Sally likes to read the Twilight series, however, John prefers to read Shakespeare. This difference in taste shows that the choice to read is not an indicator of intelligence by itself. Now, this is sort of a flippant example here, but the point I'm trying to make is that both those first and second sentences are dealing with the idea of reading books. They're still linked within that broad action, and they have something in common. So this way, your three sentences are following each other logically. Do also notice, just like I mentioned earlier, that it is really the third sentence that is going to be your actual thesis statement. Those first two sentences won't be underlined as your thesis. They're just part of your introduction paragraph that are setting up the context. Now let's end by looking at an example comparative thesis statement that actually is dealing with literary texts. I am going to use the examples of The Island of Dr. Moreau and Heart of Darkness. These are two stories about characters who travel to exotic lands, see a lot of people die in really horrible ways, and then return back home again. And Prendick from The Island of Dr. Moreau sort of freaks out and holds himself up and won't talk to anybody anymore, while Marlowe continues to sort of live life normally as a sailor. So here's the example thesis. Prendick from The Island of Dr. Moreau and Marlowe from Heart of Darkness both face the darkness of death during their adventures. However, while Prendick's experience leads him to withdraw from society, Marlowe continues to travel and engage with others. Marlowe's ability to remain a functioning member of society stems from the fact that he finds a deeper meaning in his experience, while Prendick merely loses himself in the horror of death. So let's break this down into its three components. Prendick from The Island of Dr. Moreau and Marlowe from Heart of Darkness both face the darkness of death during their adventures. So here I am comparing two characters, Prendick and Marlowe, and the way that I'm comparing them for their similarity is something that is extremely obvious. Not only is nobody going to disagree with this statement, it's really a fundamental aspect of the entire novels. It's the basis of the novel's plots. But what this first point of similarity is going to do is it's going to allow me to segue into my point of difference, which does build off of that obvious point of similarity. However, while Prendick's experience leads him to withdraw from society, Marlowe continues to travel and engage with others. So yes, I'm starting with that obvious similarity, but then I'm looking at what the end point of that similarity is. And that end point is very different in the way these two characters end up. This is something that also is somewhat obvious. You do need to engage with the text to a certain degree to be able to come up with this conclusion about the way that these characters end up. But at the same time, it is something that no one is really going to disagree with this statement for the most part. And because of that, if I were to stop at this sentence, I would not have a strong thesis statement. I would have something that was true but obvious. So then what I do is I move to that why do we care question with my third sentence. And here what I've done is I've said, okay, I have this really obvious similarity, I have a slightly less obvious point of difference, and that difference is a little bit surprising. If these two guys both have these horrific experiences but somehow manage to have very different outcomes, well, how do I explain away those different outcomes? What's the reason for them? Is there something that we can do in our lives to help us deal with trauma so that we don't become hermits holed up from society? So that's where I come up with my third sentence here. Marlowe's ability to remain a functioning member of society stems from the fact that he finds a deeper meaning in his experience, while Prendick merely loses himself in the horror of death. So here, this idea of can we find meaning in trauma? Can we find meaning in horror? This, if you're able to do it, is the way to survival, essentially. So this is this broad message, this broad decision I'm coming away with. It is something that not everyone will necessarily agree with. People may not agree that meaning is the reason that one character acts differently than the other. They may even disagree with whether there's meaning in Marlowe's journey at all. Or they may believe that Prendick does find meaning, but melts down anyway. The point being here is that this is something people will disagree with. It is my opinion. It is something that I'm going to need to engage with the text at length to be able to prove why my opinion is right. So again, this is just one example of a comparative thesis. There's lots of different ways you can engage with similarities and differences in that why do we care question. But the key thing to keep in mind here is that the first point, whether it's your similarity or difference, can be extremely obvious. Your second point can still be somewhat true but obvious, but should be a little less so. And then that third question, the why do we care sentence, is your actual thesis and is the most important aspect of your overall setup here. And that concludes the...
Okay, I'm hoping that was a little easier to hear. I think it did a pretty decent job of explaining some of the things that are smaller parts and pieces, more sophisticated parts of the comparison and contrast that you have to do. And I like the example, even though it's not the same example as the ones you're going to be reading. All of you are going to be choosing different ones. So there's a little bit more help on that by request. I wanted to point out something else here. Let's show you some more assistance on. That was a thesis statement. There's a little bit more here, and what we have here is, again, a comparative analysis guide. This is a different college. It kind of kind of walks you through exactly how you might do a literary one. Now, you've done comparative and contrast. It's the same function whether you're comparing and contrasting, McDonald's and Burger King versus one essay versus another. But obviously, the essay one's going to be a little more complicated. So I wanted to give you another example of how that could work with the whole essay, and not just the thesis.
Create a good literary comparison essay. And some principles they show to keep in mind when you're reading a literary comparison essay. And then we're going to read two poems, and then we're going to read an essay about those two poems that compares both of them. So I think it'll be a pretty thorough introduction to literary comparison. So literary comparison is an essay that examines two or more works in relation to one another. So it examines, typically it has a select set of similarities or differences, right? That an author beforehand analyzes the two pieces and sort of looks at what are some of the ways they're similar, what are some of the ways they're different, and picks some, and those are the basis of the essay. So the comparisons often highlight aspects of works that a reader might not otherwise notice and give us new perspectives. And that's what's really valuable about a comparative essay. In an analysis essay, we're just looking inside of a work and we're making an argument for a theme of the work. But in a comparative essay, we're not just looking inside of the work, we're looking at one work as a lens to another work or in relation to another work. And that's what makes comparative literature really powerful, right? And there's a whole field of study called comparative study that just looks at how texts, relate to one another and how texts illuminate one another, right? When reading a text with another text in mind, you get a whole different perspective on that first text. So it's an interesting, and it's almost magical when you actually do a literary comparative essay. And you get to a surprising thesis. It does feel sort of magical, something like I never would have gotten to this point if I hadn't looked at this work in relation to another work. So it's a powerful form of literary critique or analysis. The heart of a comparison is always the thesis, right? Your literary comparison can only be as good as your thesis. A really good thesis for a comparative essay usually highlights a surprising similarity in works that are...
I want to make sure I'm not missing anything from our live people here. So let me go back over here and make sure we're not missing anything. Sorry, it doesn't make it easy to see things that are happening at the same time. Give me a second. Okay, we're good.
that appear different or surprising difference in works that appear similar. And that's the real key, right? You want to ask yourself, generally are these two pieces similar? If they are, what can I show that's different? Or generally are these two pieces different? If so, what can I show that's similar? So a comparative essay succeeds when it reveals something new about both texts. When a reader comes away sort of saying, oh yeah, I never would have seen these. So as a writer, or as the author of a comparative essay, you're really trying to bring the reader to that point, show the reader something new that he or she wouldn't have seen about the relationship of the two essays, of the two pieces. So the thesis is not surprising, is obvious, and not really worth revealing. So that's the danger of the comparative essays. If your thesis is too obvious, or it doesn't bring the reader to that sort of aha moment where he or she says, oh yeah, now I see these works in a different way. If it doesn't bring the reader to that point, then the thesis is, the essay is not really even worth writing. Also, a good thesis typically follows the although format. Like in research, theses usually follow if-then. The although format is good for literary comparisons. Although these works are similar in these ways, and these ways, and these ways, they're actually different, surprisingly, in these ways, and these ways. Or although these works appear different in these ways, and these ways, they're actually similar in these ways, and these ways. So you do typically want to talk about both similarities and differences. But if your thesis is mostly about the differences, deal with those at the end, since you want the reader to see your insights toward the end of the essay. But at the beginning, you probably want to talk about the sort of more obvious ways that somebody might see them as similar. And same with the opposite thesis. If your thesis is primarily about ways that works are surprisingly similar, you want to point out those obvious differences towards the beginning of the essay. So let's take a quick look at a sample. So here are two poems that we're going to look at, and I thought we'd read the poems first and then look at an essay on these two poems. The first one is by a famous poem it's a sonnet by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's called How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Waves. And the second poem is by Vincent Millay, St. Vincent Millay, and it's called Recuerdo. So I'm just going to start by reading these poems, and then we'll move into the essay. So in Recuerdo, just grab me a pen real quick. In Recuerdo, the title is How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. Here's the poem. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being in ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men turn. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose when with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. So clearly, the author of this poem loves her husband, or loves this person tremendously. It's an expression of love, although it's been questioned whether or not this poem is being sarcastic and ironic. Does she really love him, or is she being sarcastic and actually hates him? But that's neither here nor there. Let's take a look at the next one, Recuerdo by St. Vincent Millay. We were very tired, we were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night upon the ferry. It was bare and bright and smelled like a stable, but we looked into a fire, we leaned across a table. We lay on the hilltop underneath the moon, and the whistles kept blowing, and the dawn came soon. We were very tired, we were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. And you ate an apple and I ate a pear, from a dozen of each we had bought somewhere. And the sky went wane, and the wind came cold, and the sun rose dripping, a bucket full of gold. We were very tired, we were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. We hailed good morrow, mother, to a shawl-covered head, and bought a morning paper, which neither of us read. She wept, God bless you, for the apples and pears, and we gave her all our money, but our subway fares. So definitely a different tone in here. This poem is just more about what these people are doing. They're tired, they're going out, they're seeing lots of interesting things, they're doing mundane things that they don't seem to mind because they seem sort of caught up in one another. I mean, this really feels like a good love poem to me. Although, it's not as obvious, right, as the other poems' expression of love. If I was to look at both of these, I would say primarily these seem really different. I mean, if we really think about it, the second one is a love poem, and the first one is clearly a love poem too. But they're really different poems. I mean, this one's a sonnet, the other one has 3 stanzas. This one is all about expressing the love to the husband, and the other one is just about going back and forth in the ferry and doing interesting things. So primarily I'd say these were different. So if I was going to write an essay on this, I would probably look for surprising similarities and ask myself, in what ways are these poems actually surprisingly similar? One of the ways is repetition, obviously. They both have repetition. That could be a surprising similarity. They are both about love, I think. That makes them sort of thematically similar. This one has a lot of imagery in it. This one doesn't have quite as much imagery as the other poems, so I guess that's a way that they're different. So anyways, those are some of the things I'd probably do before I started thinking about what my thesis was going to be. Is what are some of the ways they're similar? What are some of the ways they're different? What about in terms of scheme, or in terms of meter and tone, or feeling tone, right? The tone of the poem. This poem seems much darker. The first one seems much more intense. Anyways, let's take a look at an essay. So here's an essay that was written on both of these poems by a student. It's called Opposites Attract. And I'll just read through, and there's some things this essay does really well, some things the essay doesn't do quite as well, but I think it'll make a good sample essay to look at and to think about how to develop a comparison. So the author starts, in life some things are never what they seem to be. That same can be said when comparing two poems that don't seem alike, but are in many ways, more ways than one. How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways by Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Ricardo by Edison Vincent Millay portray two very different subjects. In How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways, Browning portrays the endless love a woman has for her husband, while Ricardo talks about a memory a woman has with her husband. I guess it's her husband. These two poems have their differences when it comes to subject, the use of metaphors in the form of the poem. They both display the theme of love, happiness, and compassion. I think this is basically her thesis here. When they have differences when it comes to subject, the use of metaphors in the form of the poem, they both display a theme of love, happiness, and compassion. They also incorporate repetition, so this is still part of the thesis, to emphasize the importance of how they feel. Another similarity between these two poems is the visual imagery used to enhance the poems. I don't know if that's actually similar, but finally both poems incorporate rhyme scheme to add to the flow and creativity of the poem. So that's kind of a longer thesis. I'd say the author of this is probably trying to take on too much. She's looking at these poems in a lot of different ways. For a relatively short essay, I think that would be a lot to look at in depth, to the kind of depth that you want to get at. It's better to go into fewer subjects more deeply than to talk, sort of superficially about many subjects. But still, the structure is good. She's going to look at some of the differences. She has some ideas about how they're similar.
Okay, so that gives you another example of what something might look like, sound like when you're comparing and contrasting. I'm going to put this particular website in the announcement so that you can kind of get a feel for where this might look. And it also gives you a bunch of other tools that have to do and focus on literary comparison and contrast, as opposed to just a regular comparison and contrast. There's also some sample outlines comparing two novels, a sample essay. So this is a really good guide to do that. So I will do that as soon as we finish this so you can take a look at that. Now, I'll leave a little bit of time left here in case we just want to talk about anything else. Anyone that's here live, do you want to chat about anything else? I know the audio is not very great, so I'm going to provide all of those audio links in case you want to listen to them separately. Anything else that you want to talk about that we can assist with without the videos?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that that's not really great for you, Marin.
Oh, it's okay. I just want to let you know for the other people that are watching the videos because I can control my audio. But anyway, it's gonna be. But it's good that you will provide the links. That's the important thing. I have two things. I send you an email asking you something when you have time to check.
I will check with that as soon as we're done here, okay?
Okay. So the other thing is regarding my idea is to make the essay as the block approach. But when I do the difference or the similarities, I have in my mind two blocks, one with one thing and the opposite. But then I don't know what else should I write because they ask you here that you should summarize the the article. Like they don't. It's not like a poem that you can talk about the theme or you can talk about the tone. They have different things.
You can still talk about the same things like theme or tone, you can still talk about those as comparing and contrasting as well if you want to.
Because the two articles that I picked, they are not criticizing the the play. They are just making statements, or what is like, they are not judging or celebrating. It's just they are just saying one is embracing baseball as a symbol, and the other one is embracing the fence. It's just the only difference that I can see, and it's the same at the same level because they are using the symbol. Like that's what I noticed, but.
Well, I like where you're going with it. I'm trying to think of another section that you might want to work with. Like maybe you could just talk about the comparing and contrasting the actual stances that they take. Like one is focusing on more of the baseball, or one is focusing more on the fences. Maybe do a block on like the personal differences of the actual authors as well. Would that work?
Say that again, the last part that I couldn't hear.
So focusing more on the actual author's personalities or stances, perhaps. So, you're focused on what they talked about with fences. One's talking about this, one's talking about this, but maybe talk a little bit about why those particular two authors do choose those two ways of looking at it. Is that possible?
Sure, yeah. So that will be like if I do like blocks, like a block approach, I do like the difference with the symbols, and I can do something else. Or because when last time when we do the comparison, if you pick the block approach, it's only
Two paragraphs, right?
what? Sorry?
Right, so you feel like it's too short.
In my mind, but I don't know because they are not saying anything bad. They are just giving like it's like a, I don't know. It's a long. It's really long and it's the same. Like they are not criticizing. They are not saying Wilson
Yeah.
do this wrong or he was really cool. Like they are not saying, just saying that the symbol was one thing and the symbol was another thing. But
I understand what you're saying. And you really want to do these two authors. You find that they're what they say is useful to you, so you don't want to move.
and the problem is I already used the Bible. I don't know how to pronounce that. Bible.
Well, and don't, I mean, you can summarize some things. You're going to need to do a little bit of summary. Just what they're saying is your essay shouldn't be totally a summary of. You shouldn't spend like half of your essay summarizing. But if you need to include long quotes or long summaries as an example of what you're saying or what you're saying about your two analysts, that's okay. Does that make sense?
Yes. And how many the estimate quotes that you want in this?
Well, we need a minimum of 3, but you can have as many as you need.
Okay.
Okay, so like there's not a set number that makes it an A paper. Some people use lots of them because of what they're saying, and some people use only 3.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
That-
Thank you
That's
so much.
not that's not a perfect answer for you, but you can use a lot more than that if you need to.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. I will go and check out your email right now, and I will also post those links right now. Okay. All right,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Thanks for a great class.